when an arrogant billionaire casually mocked a black janitor, saying, "If you can play that piano, I'll say, I do today." She had no idea. That night, everything would change. What started as a flippant challenge would soon become the most shocking, transformative moment of her life. It was an evening drenched in luxury, and the air inside the Vanderbrook Grand Hotel smelled of fresh roses and expensive perfume. The grand ballroom shimmered under the opulent chandeliers, each crystal reflecting the glow of a life most people would never see. Tonight, as it always was a high society gala, filled with power brokers, celebrities, and donors all gathered to stroke egos and cement their connections. A grand piano sat under a spotlight near the stage. Its polished black surface gleamed in the artificial light, and next to it stood the elegant blonde figure of Jacqueline Whitmore, the billionaire philanthropist and media mogul. Jacqueline had a commanding presence, her every move drawing attention, her laughter ringing like the sharp chime of glass breaking in the room. She wasn't just a fixture in the world of charity, she was its queen. Her sparkling silver gown caught the light as she strolled through the room, effortlessly sidestepping any conversation she deemed beneath her. As she made her way to the stage, she stopped momentarily, turning her gaze towards the piano with a playful glint in her eye. She smirked at her guests, each one wondering what was coming next. "If you can play this piano, I'll say I do today," she teased loudly. Her words intended to be the kind of playful dare that only someone with her kind of wealth and status could throw out without a second thought. The crowd chuckled, unaware of the man in the background who had heard her. Standing just beyond the circle of light, a man dressed in a plain navy uniform pushed a cart down the back hall. His name was Elijah Ross, and while he didn't belong to the world of crystal glasses or diamond necklaces, he had something those people never did, a talent that could change the game. Elijah pushed the cart along the corridor, his face expressionless, his eyes focused on the task at hand. His role was simple: cleaning, making sure that no one noticed him as he worked. He had learned long ago that the less attention he attracted, the safer he was in this gilded world of wealth. Tonight, though, something inside him stirred. The piano beckoned. His fingers itched to play, but he had been trained not to show his skills. He had lived in the shadows of this world long enough to understand the rules. Musicians like him didn't belong here. He knew it. He had accepted it. And yet, when he passed by the piano, the hauntingly familiar sound of a note being struck made him pause. For a moment, the world outside the ballroom melted away, and Elijah could almost hear the notes of the piano, as they filled the air, calling him back to a time long past. A time before the weight of poverty and the walls of servitude had shackled his dreams. But those were just memories now. He had left that world behind when he'd taken this job at the Vanderbrook Grand, cleaning the floors for those who lived a life of endless abundance. He turned away quickly, pulling himself back to the present. No, he thought, that's not my world anymore. He moved the cart with mechanical precision, his mind trained not to draw attention. Meanwhile, Jacqueline was still grinning, her eyes scanning the crowd, enjoying the spotlight. She raised a glass of champagne, her lips curling into a devilish smile as the room quieted, awaiting her next command. "You heard me," Jacqueline said, a little louder now, her voice sharp and teasing. "If anyone here can play better than a professional, I'll take them up on their offer. But they'll have to play it for me first. It's just a bit of fun after all, right?" The room's laughter echoed, but there was a slight edge to it. They all knew Jacqueline. She was known for being ruthless, but always with a smile that could charm the stars out of the sky. Elijah hesitated for a moment, watching the guests mingle. His body felt like it was at a crossroads, his feet stuck in two different worlds. Should he just keep walking, keep cleaning, and fade back into the shadows as usual? Or should he, for once, stand up and let himself be seen? Jacqueline's gaze turned toward the piano again, a cruel smirk still playing at the corner of her lips. She noticed Elijah in the distance, and for a brief second, their eyes locked. He didn't look away. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his hesitation. For a moment, the crowd's chatter seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in the room. Jacqueline's voice sliced through the silence. "I see you there, cleaning boy," she called out. "You've heard my dare, haven't you? What do you say? If you play well enough, I'll let you in. You'll have a seat in the room that's always denied to you." Elijah felt the weight of her words like a slap across his face. He had been invisible all his life, a shadow, a background figure. But here, in this moment, it was as if she had stripped him bare, called him out, daring him to show his worth. "Play," she repeated, her tone now mocking. "Play like a real musician, and you'll get more than just applause." The words hung in the air like poison. Elijah's hand gripped the cart harder, his knuckles turning white. Was this really happening? Was she really mocking him, testing him like a pawn in a game of vanity? But in his chest, something shifted. He had never been one to bow to cruelty. This challenge was nothing more than a game to her, but to him it was an opportunity. He could show them all, finally be seen for who he truly was, not just some invisible worker in the background. Elijah stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly, their eyes following him. His steps were slow but deliberate. The piano sat there waiting like a challenge. Promise. As he reached the stage, the room fell silent, and the spotlight illuminated him. The crowd, sensing something different in his movements, quieted further. Elijah stood before the piano, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his gloves and set them neatly aside. The weight of the moment settled on him like a stone, and he inhaled deeply. "I'm not here to play for you," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, his words firm and unwavering. "I'm here to play for myself. For once, let me be seen." The crowd, unsure of how to respond, was silent. Jacqueline raised an eyebrow, sensing something in Elijah she hadn't anticipated. She expected him to fail, to stumble. She had thought this would be another joke, a little trick to humiliate a man who belonged nowhere near this world. But now she wasn't so sure. Elijah sat at the piano, his fingers poised above the keys. The weight of the room's attention pressed down on him, but he wasn't nervous. This wasn't about winning her challenge or impressing them. It was about showing them who he was. A man who had spent too long in the shadows, now stepping into the light. With one smooth motion, he struck the first note. It was quiet at first, like a whisper, but then it grew. The sound filled the room, deep, warm, and rich. Elijah played with a fluidity that sent waves of awe rippling through the crowd. Jacqueline watched, her confident smile slowly slipping from her face as the music took hold of the room. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to play like this. As Elijah continued, his music told a story of hardship, of sacrifice, and of untapped potential. Every note seemed to resonate with the struggles he had endured and the passion that had carried him through. This wasn't just a performance. This was his soul laid bare before them, speaking louder than any words ever could. The room, once filled with mockery, now listened in stunned silence. Jacqueline's smile was gone. Elijah wasn't just playing, he was owning the moment. And so, the challenge was no longer just a dare. It was the beginning of something much greater, something that no one in that room could have anticipated. The music continued to flow, its cadence effortless and graceful, as if the piano itself had recognized Elijah's touch. The room, initially uncertain and filled with hushed whispers, now stood motionless, all eyes locked on him. Every note he played seemed to reveal more about who he was, his past, his hardships, and the life he had fought so hard to rise from. Jacqueline stood at the edge of the stage, her posture stiff, her expression unreadable. She had seen performances, witnessed prodigies, and heard maestros play at the highest levels. But this was different. She hadn't expected him to have such control, such soul in his music. The simplicity with which he played drew the crowd in, pulling them into the depths of his melody. The air seemed to hold its breath, the entire room waiting to see what would come next. A few moments earlier, she had thought of this as a casual dare, a playful challenge to mock him, to show him his place. But now, as the music swelled, Jacqueline couldn't ignore the realization that her words had triggered something she had never anticipated. She could hear it in the resonance of each note, the elegance of his touch, the same skill, the same artistry that had once belonged to the elite. But no, she thought, pushing the thought away. He was still a janitor. This was just a fluke, a trick of circumstance. She wouldn't allow herself to entertain the idea that someone like him could possess talent equal to that of the world's finest musicians. And yet, as his fingers danced over the keys, her thoughts scattered. Around the room, the guests exchanged glances, the initial skepticism now replaced with awe. This wasn't some random servant trying to fit in with the high society crowd. This was a man with a gift that could not be ignored. Elijah's fingers moved with fluid precision. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, captivated by the beauty of the music, unaware that they were witnessing a transformation. Each note, played with purpose and intent, conveyed a message beyond just the music. It was a message of dignity, of self-worth, and of rising above the constraints of one's circumstances. At the back of the room, Gloria Johnson, the long-serving housekeeper, stood frozen in place. She had witnessed Elijah's struggle, his quiet resilience over the years. She had known him as a worker, a janitor, a shadow who moved in the background, but never before had she seen him like this. She knew him now for what he truly was, an artist who had been hidden by a system that valued only status and wealth. As the last note reverberated through the room, there was a long silence, a silence that felt different from any other silence the room had experienced. It was no longer the silence of mockery, but one of reflection. Elijah sat still at the piano, his hands resting on the keys, eyes closed for just a moment, as if allowing the last remnants of the music to hang in the air. Jacqueline, her earlier confidence now shaken, stood at the edge of the stage, her fingers lightly gripping the railing. For the first time that night, she was uncertain. She had expected to feel the satisfaction of seeing him fail, of watching him humiliate himself in front of the crowd, but now she felt something entirely different. The applause, when it came, was tentative at first, but it quickly grew in strength, filling the room with appreciation. Jacqueline looked around at her guests, their faces reflecting admiration, confusion, and, in some cases, a sense of disbelief. Elijah had done something none of them had anticipated. He had captivated them, not with his status or his wealth, but with something far more powerful, his humanity. As the applause continued, Elijah stood up from the piano, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't bow, didn't seek their approval. Instead, he walked to the side of the stage, his eyes meeting Jacqueline's for the briefest of moments. There was no arrogance in his gaze, no challenge. There was only a quiet assertion that spoke louder than any words could. Jacqueline swallowed hard. Her mouth felt dry. For the first time, she realized that she had underestimated him. More than that, she had underestimated the power of his music, the power of his presence in this room. What was meant to be a humiliating joke had turned into a moment of reckoning. Elijah didn't wait for her response. He didn't need to. He had made his point. He had shown everyone in that room who he was. Not a janitor, not a servant, but a man who, when given the opportunity, could take center stage and prove his worth, not just in music, but in life. As he made his way toward the back of the room, the applause slowly died down. Guests resumed their conversations, but the energy had shifted. People now spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the quiet dignity that had settled over the room. Jacqueline remained standing at the edge of the stage, her smile faltering as the weight of the situation pressed down on her. The words she had spoken in jest now seemed like an invitation to something far more serious. "Elijah," she finally said, her voice tight, "that was unexpected." He didn't look at her as he walked past. "It wasn't a performance," he said quietly. "It was a statement." Jacqueline's chest tightened. Her initial impulse to dismiss him, to treat his presence like a sideshow, now seemed foolish. She had underestimated the power of his talent and the silent power of his presence. But what was she supposed to do now? The room had seen it. The crowd had witnessed him stand up for himself and, in doing so, they had begun to see him for who he truly was. There was no turning back now. She could feel the shift in the room, the change in how people saw her. The glares, the judgment, the subtle shift in the way they regarded her. The thing she had taken so much pride in, the control she held over the situation, was slipping from her fingers, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The evening seemed to stretch on, but the room had irrevocably changed. The air, once thick with the hum of laughter and champagne, now felt charged, heavy with a silence that no one seemed willing to break. The gala was meant to be a celebration, a spectacle of wealth and generosity, but for the first time, the focus wasn't on the donors or the celebrities. It was on Elijah Ross, the janitor, and the performance that had just unfolded before them. As the crowd dispersed into smaller groups, some still chatting excitedly about the unexpected turn of events, Jacqueline felt a coldness settle in her chest. She had been a master of control, always the one orchestrating the evening, the one with the power to direct the narrative. But tonight, she had been outplayed, not just by a man she had dismissed, but by the very thing she had spent her life curating, her own public image. Gloria Johnson, the housekeeper who had worked alongside Elijah for years, stood by the stage, quietly observing the reactions around her. She had known Elijah long before this night, long before he had ever stepped onto a stage or played in front of an audience. She had seen the pain in his eyes when he talked about his lost dreams, the way he had once spoken of his time at the conservatory before life had forced him to give up music. Tonight, though, she saw something else, something she hadn't seen in him before. He wasn't the invisible worker anymore. Tonight, he had stepped into the light, and the room had no choice but to see him. As the last of the applause faded, Jacqueline made her way toward the edge of the stage. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, the sound echoing in the sudden stillness. She caught a glimpse of Elijah as he slipped quietly into the back hallway, his head lowered, his steps deliberate. He was retreating not out of shame, but because he had nothing left to prove. Jacqueline approached the piano, her eyes still focused on the empty seat where Elijah had been moments before. She ran a hand lightly over the polished wood, tracing the curve of the piano's lid, as if searching for some answer there. The music still lingered in her mind, the melody he had played so effortlessly, a haunting, soulful tune that had taken her by surprise. She had underestimated him, thought of him only as an accessory to the evening, a small piece in the grand machine that was her life. But in that moment, he had shifted the dynamics of the room. He had proven that there was more to him than met the eye, and in doing so, had exposed the fragility of her own position. Behind her, she heard footsteps. She didn't turn, but she knew who it was. Gloria, with her knowing eyes, had watched it all unfold. She had seen the way Jacqueline had smirked earlier, the way she had mocked Elijah's position, and now, she saw the discomfort in Jacqueline's posture as she stood alone at the piano. "I'm not sure if you fully understand what happened here tonight," Gloria said, her voice soft but firm, as if she had been carrying the weight of this moment for far too long. Jacqueline turned slowly, her face a mixture of confusion and reluctance. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice low, as if she didn't really want to know the answer. Gloria stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You didn't just challenge him to play, you challenged his dignity. And when someone's dignity is on the line, there's no telling what they might do to protect it." Jacqueline felt a pang of guilt. She didn't know how to respond. She had never considered what her words would mean to someone like Elijah. To her, he was part of the background, an invisible figure meant to serve her world. But now, in the aftermath of his performance, the walls she had built around herself seemed to crack, revealing something she hadn't expected to see. Her own complicity in a system that upheld the status quo at the expense of people like Elijah. "I didn't mean to," Jacqueline trailed off, her voice faltering. Gloria's words had struck a nerve, but Jacqueline wasn't ready to face the full extent of what she had done. "I thought it would be a joke, something lighthearted." Gloria shook her head. "It was never a joke for him. You may have thought it was a dare, but for him it was a chance to show who he really is. To show that he's not just a cleaning boy." Gloria's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "You've been living in a world where people like him are invisible, Jacqueline. And tonight he made sure you saw him." The weight of Gloria's words settled over Jacqueline like a heavy blanket, suffocating her pride. She had always believed that she had the power to control the narrative, to make people see what she wanted them to see. But Elijah had flipped that power on its head, showing everyone in the room, not just his musical talent, but the depth of his character. "I never meant for it to be like this," Jacqueline whispered, more to herself than to Gloria. Gloria gave a slight nod, as if understanding that Jacqueline wasn't yet ready to fully confront the reality of her actions. "You didn't," she said softly, "but sometimes, life doesn't wait for us to get it right. Sometimes, it forces us to see things we'd rather ignore." For a moment, Jacqueline stood in silence, her mind swirling with the events of the evening. The music, the crowd, the challenge. It all felt like a blur, like a dream she couldn't quite wake up from. And then, like a sudden flash of clarity, she realized something. She had underestimated Elijah, yes, but more importantly, she had underestimated herself. She had allowed her ego, her power, and her status to blind her to the reality of the people around her. "I need to find him," Jacqueline said suddenly, her voice firm and resolute. "I need to talk to him." Gloria raised an eyebrow. "Talk to him?" "Yes," Jacqueline replied, her expression hardening. "I need to apologize. I can't just pretend like this didn't happen. Not after what he did tonight." Gloria said nothing, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a glimmer of respect, perhaps. It wasn't often that someone like Jacqueline Whitmore took responsibility for their actions, and even rarer for them to seek out the person they had wronged. As Jacqueline turned and started toward the back hallway, Gloria watched her go, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Maybe, just maybe, tonight would be the beginning of something new. Jacqueline's footsteps echoed down the narrow hallway, a stark contrast to the lavish ball she had just left behind. The sound felt oddly final, as if each step she took was another thread unraveling from the carefully constructed life she had built. A life that now, in the wake of Elijah's performance, felt far less certain. The corridor was dimly lit, its walls adorned with art that seemed to mock the very conversation Jacqueline was about to have. It was an eerie place to find clarity, but as Jacqueline approached the service door at the end of the hall, she felt the weight of her decisions settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about correcting a moment's mistake. It was about confronting a system she had unknowingly helped perpetuate. She reached the door and knocked lightly. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet hallway, but it was the only thing she could do to break the silence that had been building inside her all night. Elijah opened the door after a moment, his expression unreadable. He had expected this, though perhaps not so soon. He had been waiting for her to come, but it hadn't felt real until now. Standing in front of him, Jacqueline suddenly realized the vast chasm between them. The last time she had looked at him, he had been cleaning, a nameless figure in the background. Now, in the aftermath of his music, he seemed to be a different person altogether, a man who had quietly shifted the balance of power in this room. "I was wrong," Jacqueline said, her voice steady but filled with a vulnerability she wasn't used to showing. "I didn't understand what I was doing. I thought I was just making a joke, but I realize now that I made a mistake. I disrespected you." Elijah stood in the doorway, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. He hadn't expected an apology, let alone so quickly, but he wasn't sure how to respond. The truth was, he didn't need her apology, not really. What he needed was for the world to stop pretending that people like him didn't matter. "You didn't just disrespect me," Elijah said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "You disrespected everyone who works behind the scenes, everyone who isn't seen by the world. I'm just the one who had the chance to make you see it." Jacqueline flinched at his words, but they were true, and she knew it. She had always known it. But somewhere along the way, her ambition had clouded her vision, making her believe that she was exempt from the same rules she imposed on others. Tonight, Elijah had shattered that illusion. "I wasn't thinking," Jacqueline admitted, her words more vulnerable than she intended. "I've spent my life trying to control everything, every detail, every event, every person in my orbit. And I never thought about the people who actually make things happen, the ones who are never seen, the ones who do the work. You showed me something tonight, Elijah, something I've ignored for too long." There was a long pause. Elijah didn't say anything right away. He wasn't sure what he was expecting from her. Apologies had always felt hollow to him, especially when they came from people who only apologized to preserve their own image. But something in Jacqueline's words caught him off guard. There was a sincerity there, an openness that was rare for someone like her. "I don't expect anything from you," Elijah said after a moment, his voice quiet. "I don't need your apology. What I need is for people to stop pretending we don't matter. People like me, people like Gloria, we're invisible until someone wants something from us. And when we finally get a chance to speak, we're dismissed. Not because we're not capable, but because we don't fit the mold." Jacqueline's heart tightened at his words. She had seen the truth in his eyes earlier during his performance. It was a truth that had shaken her, but it was one she wasn't sure how to face. She had spent her life climbing, building her empire, and yet here was a man who, in a few minutes, had made her realize just how far she had to go before she could truly say she understood what it meant to have power. "I've been part of the problem," Jacqueline said softly. "I've spent my life focused on my own success, on my own power, and I've ignored the people who make that power possible. I've made it all about me, and in doing so, I've made everyone else invisible. I can't undo that, but I want to try. I want to start by listening to you, Elijah, and to people like you." Elijah looked at her, his gaze steady. He wasn't sure if her words were just an attempt to smooth over her guilt, but there was something in the way she spoke that made him think it was more than that. She had the resources, the platform, to actually do something about the inequality she had perpetuated. Whether she would follow through was another matter entirely, but for the first time, he saw a flicker of potential in her words. "Listening isn't enough," Elijah said, his voice firm but not unkind. "People don't need to be heard, they need to be seen. They need to be treated like equals. not as background noise to someone else's story. Your apology means something, but what comes next? That's what matters. Jacqueline nodded, her gaze unwavering. I agree, and I want to do more than apologize. I want to make sure this doesn't just stay a moment in time. I want to help change the narrative. There was a brief moment of silence between them. Elijah knew that words were easy, but actions were harder. He had seen too many people in positions of power make empty promises, only to retreat back into their comfort zones when things got difficult. But this was different. He could see it in her eyes. If you're serious, Elijah said quietly, then it's time for you to make some changes. Real changes. Jacqueline met his gaze, her resolve hardening. I'm ready. The days that followed the gala were a whirlwind of reflection and change, both for Jacqueline Whitmore and for the Vanderbrook Grand Hotel. Jacqueline had spent her career crafting a perfect image of herself, a carefully curated persona that left no room for imperfection. But after that night, she couldn't escape the reality that had been so clearly laid out for her. The system she had built was flawed, and the time had come to address it. The morning after the gala, she found herself sitting in her office, staring out the large glass window that overlooked the city. The skyline shimmered in the early light, but there was no beauty in it for her today. It felt like a cage, a gilded prison she had created, where only those with the right label were allowed to thrive. She had always believed that wealth and status were the marks of success, but the performance she had witnessed from Elijah had forced her to confront the truth. Those things didn't define a person's worth. Dignity did, and dignity had no uniform. Jacqueline, her assistant's voice cut through the silence, pulling her from her thoughts. The meeting with the board is in 15 minutes. Jacqueline exhaled slowly and nodded, forcing herself to straighten up. She had known this moment was coming, the moment when she would have to explain the changes she intended to make, not just in her company, but in herself. It wasn't going to be easy, but if she was going to be a part of the solution, she needed to start by taking responsibility for her actions. When she entered the boardroom, the faces of her colleagues were already set in their usual masks of professionalism. They weren't aware of the storm brewing inside her. As she took her seat at the head of the table, she could feel their eyes on her, waiting for the usual updates on profits and future ventures. But this time, she wasn't there to talk about numbers. Good morning, everyone, Jacqueline began, her voice clear but tinged with a vulnerability that was unfamiliar to them. I'm sure you're all aware of the events that took place at last night's gala. I need to address it, because what happened isn't just a small mistake. It's a reflection of something far bigger that has been allowed to exist within this organization. The room fell silent, the usual hum of idle chatter ceasing as they waited for her next words. I allowed a culture of invisibility to thrive, she continued, her gaze sweeping over the board members. We've spent so much time focused on our public image, our success, our donors, that we've forgotten the very people who make it all possible. The staff, the people who clean our floors, serve our food, handle the day-to-day tasks we take for granted. They've been treated like furniture, like background noise in the story we tell ourselves. A few board members exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what direction the conversation was heading. Jacqueline wasn't done yet. I made a joke at the gala, she said, her voice firm. A cruel joke aimed at someone who has given so much to this place, even though no one ever noticed. That joke was at the expense of Elijah Ross, our janitor. And while I thought it would be funny, something to entertain our guests, what I didn't realize was that I was stripping away his dignity. I was making him invisible in front of everyone. There was a pause. No one spoke. Jacqueline let the weight of her words hang in the air, knowing she could no longer hide behind the facade of corporate politeness. This morning, I made a decision, she said, looking up at the board. We are going to overhaul how we treat our staff. We are going to implement real change, starting with the way we view people in this company. No longer will we turn a blind eye to the hardworking individuals who keep this place running. We will raise their wages to meet a true living wage, and we will offer full benefits for every employee, including health stipends for those working night shifts. That's just the beginning. The room was still. It was clear that Jacqueline's words had struck a chord, but the reality of what she was proposing had yet to settle in. We're also going to start a scholarship fund, Jacqueline continued, her resolve growing stronger with each word. The Reed Family Scholarship. It will be dedicated to providing educational opportunities for underprivileged students, particularly those from underrepresented communities. We will give them the tools and resources they need to succeed, just like we've had. A few murmurs rippled through the board, but Jacqueline wasn't finished yet. And the third change, she added, her voice taking on a more commanding tone, is procedural. We will no longer have the rule that staff must remain out of the frame during events. From now on, every employee will be addressed by name, no exceptions. If we are going to talk about equality, we must start with the most basic form of respect, acknowledging people as human beings. At this, one of the board members, a man in his late 50s with a sharp suit and even sharper expression, spoke up. Jacqueline, this is quite a shift, he said, his voice laced with concern. You're asking us to implement policies that could have significant financial implications. Raising wages, offering benefits, creating a scholarship program, it's a lot of change to push through in one go. Are we really ready for this? Jacqueline met his gaze without hesitation. Yes, we are. Because if we don't make these changes, if we continue to ignore the people who make everything possible, we are only feeding the very system that keeps the rest of the world in the shadows. I'm not asking you to make these changes because it's convenient. I'm asking you because it's right. She paused, letting her words sink in. This was no longer about protecting her company's image or maintaining the status quo. This was about real change, change that she had ignored for far too long. For far too long, we've lived in a world where people like Elijah have been invisible, Jacqueline said softly, but with conviction. Tonight, I'll be making a public apology, and I will be announcing the scholarship and community concert initiatives. But I can't do it alone. This has to be a collective effort. It's time we stop pretending that the people who serve us don't matter. We owe them more than just a paycheck. We owe them the respect they deserve. The room was quiet for a long moment, and then, slowly, the murmurs started again, this time more thoughtful, more intrigued. Jacqueline, the same board member, spoke again, this time with less resistance. If you're serious about this, we'll support you. We'll make sure this happens. Jacqueline nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. It's not about support, it's about action. And I'm ready to make it happen. The following week was a blur of meetings, phone calls, and preparations. Jacqueline had spent years building her empire on polished speeches, charity galas, and headlines that painted her as a philanthropist and a woman of power. But now, as she embarked on this new chapter, the weight of what she had set in motion was both liberating and terrifying. The decision to address her actions publicly was one she didn't take lightly. The media, the guests at the gala, and the world she had cultivated, these were all watching closely. They expected the usual polished rhetoric, the usual spin. But Jacqueline had made a choice. No more masks, no more pretending. This would be different. It was late one evening when the press release was finalized. She sat alone in her office, staring at the carefully crafted words on the screen. The statement was concise, but it carried the weight of her admission and the promise of change. She would take full responsibility for her actions at the gala and publicly apologize to Elijah Ross, as well as to all the employees who had been subjected to an invisible hierarchy that no longer served them. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she hit send. The words would now be in the public eye, and there was no taking them back. For the first time in years, she felt the chill of vulnerability sweep over her. But when the release went live, Jacqueline's phone began to buzz almost immediately. The first notification was a message from her PR team. The press is responding well. The apology is being framed as genuine, though they want more specifics. Be prepared for a backlash, but this is a strong start. Jacqueline exhaled slowly. The apology had been out there for hours, but the real work was just beginning. The next morning, as she arrived at Vanderbrook Grand for another meeting with the board, her mind was already running through the next steps. The scholarship fund had already been set up, and discussions had begun with several institutions about collaborating on the program. The concert series was also moving forward, though it was clear it would take time to develop into what she had envisioned. But Jacqueline knew that these were just the beginning. The hardest part of this journey wasn't creating the programs or making the announcement. It was changing the culture that had thrived for so long, a culture built on exclusion, privilege, and the perpetuation of a false narrative of worth. She was determined to make that change. As she walked into the boardroom, she could feel the tension in the air. The faces around the table were still hesitant, unsure of how to navigate this shift. They had always been a part of a system that rewarded the powerful and ignored the invisible. Now, Jacqueline was asking them to rethink everything, to risk their reputations and business models in order to create a more just environment for all of their employees. The first few minutes of the meeting were awkward, as they discussed typical corporate matters. But then, one of the board members, A woman in her 40s named Clara spoke up. Jacqueline, Clara began, her voice quiet but steady. I've been thinking about everything you've proposed. And I have to admit, at first I was skeptical. But what you're suggesting, it's more than just philanthropy. It's a fundamental change in the way we do business. And I think we need to get serious about it. Jacqueline's gaze snapped to Clara, surprised. She hadn't expected this kind of support, at least not so soon. Clara continued, her tone more passionate now. We've all been complicit in the system that you're trying to dismantle. And while I'm not naive enough to think that we can fix everything overnight, we need to start somewhere. I believe that this scholarship fund and the concert series are a good first step. But what happens after that? The room fell silent. Clara's words echoed, and Jacqueline felt a sense of relief. The first crack in the wall had been made. Clara was right. The changes they were making weren't just a series of one-time gestures. They had to be part of something much bigger. We need to create a long-term plan, Jacqueline said, her voice clear and resolute. We need to focus not just on the staff at Vanderbrook Grand, but on the industry as a whole. We need to create a model that other organizations can look to when it comes to equitable pay, equal treatment, and visibility for all workers, no matter their background. Her eyes swept across the table, meeting the eyes of the board members one by one. I know this won't be easy. It will be uncomfortable. But we are in a position to make real change. And if we don't take this opportunity, we're as complicit as the system that created this inequality. There was a moment of silence before another voice spoke up. I agree with you, Jacqueline, said Roger, a senior board member known for his conservative approach to business. But we need to be practical. We can't just throw money at the problem and expect it to go away. This has to be strategic. We need to ensure that the steps we take have real impact, not just make us look good on paper. Roger's voice, though cautious, carried the weight of years spent making calculated decisions. Jacqueline nodded, recognizing the validity of his point. I understand, she said, but I think we've been too focused on looking good for too long. It's time we focus on doing good. We will put the right processes in place to measure the impact of the changes we're making. We'll have concrete goals and timelines. But above all, we need to follow through. The changes we're making aren't about image. They're about creating a culture of respect and dignity that extends to everyone. And it starts now. She looked around the table, watching as the board members absorbed her words. The room, once filled with uncertainty, now seemed to pulse with a new energy, one that was cautiously hopeful but grounded in reality. This is a risk, Roger said, breaking the silence again. But I think it's a risk worth taking. Jacqueline smiled, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. Thank you, she said softly, but this isn't just my risk. It's all of ours. And if we do this right, we can change the course of this company, and maybe even the industry, for the better. The announcement was made a week later. Jacqueline stood in front of a podium in a small, modestly lit conference room, a far cry from the glitz of the gala where she had once commanded attention. This wasn't a red carpet moment.
No champagne glasses clinked.
No flashes from eager photographers. This was about something much more meaningful. The press had been invited, of course, but this time, the story wasn't about her wealth or her status. It wasn't about another headline for her to claim. It was about her apology and the new initiatives she was launching, initiatives that, she hoped, would leave a lasting impact on not just her company but on an entire industry that had ignored the voices of the invisible for far too long. Jacqueline cleared her throat and adjusted the microphone. The familiar thrum of anticipation buzzed in the air. But today there was no calculated smile. There was no veneer of perfection. There was only her truth. Thank you for being here today, she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of sincerity. As many of you are aware, last week, I made a mistake. At a gala I hosted, I made a joke that disrespected not only a valued employee, but the very idea of dignity that all people deserve. I mocked someone I considered beneath me, and in doing so, I revealed just how deep the cracks in our system of privilege and power run. The room was silent. A few reporters scribbled notes, their pens moving quickly across their notepads. They were waiting, expecting her to pivot, to do what she did best, to turn the situation into another carefully crafted media moment. But this wasn't about that. This was different. I said something that I thought was harmless, but it was cruel. And I want to be clear, I was wrong. I apologized to Elijah Ross, and I've committed to making things right. But I realized that an apology isn't enough. Words are cheap. Actions, however, speak volumes. She paused, looking out at the small crowd in front of her. Felt strange, this moment of humility, but it was also strangely freeing. She knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Today, I'm announcing a series of initiatives that will change the way we do business at Vanderbrook Grand, and beyond that, how we interact with people who make this world run. First, we are establishing the Reed Family Scholarship Fund, which will provide financial support and educational opportunities to underprivileged students from underserved communities. We're also starting the Keys for Dignity Community Concert Series, which will offer free performances in neighborhoods that don't often have access to high-level cultural experiences. Jacqueline felt a small wave of hope rise inside her. This was real. This was what mattered. But she wasn't done yet. I also want to address the workers who make this company run every single day. People like Elijah, people like Gloria Johnson, our housekeepers, our servers, the people who work in the kitchens, the maintenance staff. We are raising wages to a true living wage, one that meets the cost of living for this city. We're adding health stipends for those working night shifts. But that's not all. We are also removing the policy that prohibits staff from appearing in event photos, and we will begin addressing all employees by name. These changes, while significant, are just the start. A soft murmur rippled through the room. There were a few journalists who exchanged skeptical glances, their doubt clear. But Jacqueline stood tall, unwavering. This isn't a PR stunt, she continued. This is a commitment, a promise to change how we view people. We're not just going to throw money at problems. We're going to create lasting systems of change. We're going to rebuild a culture where dignity isn't reserved for a select few but is extended to everyone, regardless of their position. Everyone who works at Vanderbrook Grand will know that they matter, that their contributions are valued. Jacqueline could feel the weight of the moment in the air. This wasn't easy. This wasn't a simple fix. But she had made the decision, and she knew it was the right one. The audience, once skeptical, was now listening intently. Jacqueline could see the shift. This wasn't just about her apology anymore. This was about a larger shift in the way the world operated. She wasn't just speaking to the reporters in front of her. She was speaking to everyone who had ever been ignored, overlooked, and made to feel invisible. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't asking for their approval. She was offering something better, change. As she finished her statement, Jacqueline took a deep breath and looked up at the reporters. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, "and I'll be answering questions now. But before we begin, I want to remind everyone, this isn't just about making headlines. It's about making a real difference." The room was still, and Jacqueline could feel the tension shift. This wasn't the usual media circus. This was something else entirely. The first question came from a reporter who had followed her for years, known for her directness. "Jacqueline," the reporter asked, "you've spent your career building an image of yourself as a powerful, independent businesswoman. Now, you're admitting to making a serious mistake, one that's been hidden under layers of wealth and status. What made you realize it was time to change?" Jacqueline took a moment before answering. It wasn't just one mistake. It was the culmination of many small ones. The system we've built, where wealth is revered and people are judged by their status, has never served anyone other than those at the top. Took me too long to realize it, but I can't pretend anymore that the world we've created is just. And I think it's time to dismantle it, piece by piece. Another reporter raised their hand. "But don't you think these changes will impact your business? Will your clients and investors agree with these shifts in priorities?" Jacqueline nodded, accepting the question without defensiveness. "I understand that change can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. I believe that the long-term impact will be positive for both our employees and our business. By fostering a culture of respect and equality, we will build stronger, more loyal relationships, not just with our employees, but with the people who support our brand. The future is about sustainability and inclusivity, not just profit." As Jacqueline answered more questions, she felt a sense of resolve she had never experienced before. The doubt she had once felt about her worth, her decisions, and her place in the world had been replaced with a certainty, an understanding that true power wasn't just about how much money you had or how many people admired you. It was about lifting others up, about ensuring that everyone, no matter their position, felt valued and seen. By the time the press conference ended, the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt lighter, more hopeful. Jacqueline had taken the first step toward becoming the person she aspired to be, not just the billionaire mogul but a leader who would make the changes necessary to create a fairer, more just world for everyone. And as she stepped out of the conference room, she knew this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning. The weeks that followed Jacqueline's public apology and announcement were a whirlwind of activity, both in the corporate world and in her personal life. Vanderbrook Grand's operations were under heavy scrutiny, and while the changes she had implemented were widely praised in some circles, they also stirred unease among others. The board members, her investors, and even some of the company's long-standing clients were watching closely, uncertain of how the new direction would affect their bottom line. Jacqueline knew that this would be the hardest part, making the changes stick, turning her promises into real, measurable action. She was determined, but there were moments when doubt crept in. The weight of the decisions she had made, the impact they would have on her brand, and the challenge of maintaining her status in an ever-evolving industry were heavy burdens to carry. It wasn't just the external pressures that weighed on her. Jacqueline found herself wrestling with her own internal struggle. She had spent her life building a fortress of wealth, status, and influence, a fortress that had kept her safe from the discomfort of truly understanding the lives of those who worked for her. Now, as she tried to break down that wall, she realized just how long it had kept her isolated from the very people she had promised to uplift. Every day, she walked through the hotel, past the employees who were now being treated differently, addressed by name, and given the recognition they deserved. The change was visible, but so was the tension. Some staff members were grateful, their expressions warmer, their steps more confident. But others remained cautious, unsure if the change would last. They had been burned too many times by hollow promises. Jacqueline's first real test came when she met with her senior management team to discuss the progress of the Reed Family Scholarship Fund. She had poured her heart into the initiative, knowing that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty. The scholarships weren't just a token gesture. They were a lifeline for talented students from underrepresented communities, a chance to access opportunities that had been previously closed off to them. However, some of her senior managers had different ideas. As they gathered around the conference table, Jacqueline could sense their hesitation. Jacqueline, Roger, one of her long-standing board members, began, his voice measured, "We appreciate the gesture of the scholarship fund, but the amount of resources we're investing in it, it's substantial. Do you really think it's going to benefit the company long-term? We're talking about a huge financial commitment here." Jacqueline's jaw tightened, but she remained calm. "It's not just about benefiting the company, Roger. This is about doing what's right. The scholarship fund is an investment in the future, not just in our employees but in the future of underrepresented communities. It's about providing opportunities for people who have been systematically excluded. We owe it to them and we owe it to ourselves." Roger raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "We're talking about an image here, Jacqueline. We need to be careful about how this plays out. Too much focus on social issues, and we risk alienating our core audience. We don't want to become a cause. We want to remain a brand." Jacqueline took a deep breath. "We can do both. We can remain a successful business while also supporting a cause that is long overdue. The old way of thinking of focusing solely on profit and exclusivity is a thing of the past. If we want to remain relevant in today's world, we need to evolve. We need to make our actions match the values we've spent so long claiming to uphold." The room fell silent. She could see that the message was getting through, but the skepticism was still there, lingering in the air. "I'm not asking for your approval, Roger," Jacqueline said firmly. "I'm telling you this is the direction we're going. And if we lose clients over it, then so be it. But I believe the kind of clients we'll attract by doing the right thing are the ones who will make this company thrive in the long run." Roger leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping slowly on the table as he processed her words. "You're making a bold move, Jacqueline, but let's be clear, this is your vision. We'll follow your lead. But I don't think it's going to be easy to convince everyone that this is the way forward." Jacqueline nodded. "I know, but I'm not in this to take the easy route anymore. I'm in this to change things." The conversation shifted to the Keys for Dignity Community Concert Series, another initiative Jacqueline had been working tirelessly on. She knew this project would be the ultimate test. Bringing high-quality music performances to underserved communities was no small feat. The logistics were challenging, and the pressure to make it a success was immense. But Jacqueline was determined to prove that it could be done, that beauty and culture didn't need to be reserved for the rich and the privileged. By the time the meeting ended, Jacqueline felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The road ahead was still filled with obstacles, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the right path. She had made her commitment, and now it was up to her to ensure that the changes she had promised would stick. Later that evening, as she walked the halls of Vanderbrook Grand, she passed a few employees who nodded at her as she made her way through the lobby. A few months ago, they would have never looked her in the eye, let alone acknowledged her presence. But now, things were different. She could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere, a shift that she knew was only just beginning. At that moment, Jacqueline was reminded of the night of the gala, when she had stood at the piano watching Elijah play. The way his music had filled the room and changed the air around her. It had forced her to see the world in a different way. It had forced her to see him. And now, as she walked through the hotel, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she was beginning to see everyone else. Her mind wandered back to Elijah. She hadn't spoken to him since the gala, but she knew he had been keeping his distance. She respected that, but she also knew she needed to thank him, not just for his performance, but for opening her eyes. She didn't expect him to forgive her, and she didn't deserve his forgiveness. But she needed him to know that the change he had started in her life wasn't going to stop with a public apology. It was just the beginning. A few days after the board meeting, Jacqueline reached out to Elijah. She had been thinking about him constantly, about the way he had stood there, quietly defying everything she thought she knew. His music hadn't just been a performance. It had been a declaration of who he was, an assertion that he was not just a janitor but a person with depth, talent, and worth. She knew it was time to face him, not as the billionaire who owned Vanderbrook Grand, not as the woman who had made a flippant joke at his expense, but as someone who had seen the truth in his eyes and realized how much she had failed to see before. Elijah agreed to meet her in the same cafe where she had met Gloria months ago. It was a quiet, unassuming place, far from the lavish halls of the hotel where she had once ruled with a sense of pride and entitlement. The cafe had a sense of simplicity that appealed to Jacqueline now, something real and grounded. When she arrived, she spotted him right away. He was sitting at a small table near the window, a cup of coffee in front of him, his fingers gently tapping the rim of the mug. He didn't look up as she approached, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. Jacqueline hesitated for a moment, but then, with a deep breath, she took the seat across from him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," she said quietly, her voice calm but filled with purpose. Elijah's gaze shifted to her, and for a brief moment, Jacqueline could see the wariness in his eyes. She didn't blame him. After everything that had happened, he had no reason to trust her. But she was determined to earn that trust, no matter how long it took. "You don't need to thank me," Elijah said, his voice steady but guarded. "I didn't come here to be lectured or told how much you've changed. I came here because you asked, and because there's something I need to understand." Jacqueline nodded, the weight of his words hanging in the air. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but she had made a promise to herself that she would stop hiding behind excuses, behind the safety of her wealth and status. This moment was about accountability, about facing the consequences of her actions. "I'm not here to lecture you, Elijah," she said softly. "I just want to apologize, not just for what happened at the gala, but for everything. For every time I treated you, or anyone like you didn't matter. I thought I could change things with a few speeches, a few grand gestures, but I've realized that words aren't enough. I need to show you that I'm serious, that I'm committed to making things right." Elijah didn't respond right away. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Jacqueline could feel the tension between them, the years of distance, of assumptions, of inequity that they were both trying to bridge. "I don't need you to prove anything to me," Elijah finally said. "What I need, what we all need, is for people in power to stop pretending we don't exist until they need something from us. You've taken the first step, but this isn't just about you and me. It's about everyone who's been forgotten, everyone who's been told that they don't matter, that their voices don't count. It's about changing that system, not just patching it up." Jacqueline nodded, her heart heavy with understanding. Elijah was right. This wasn't just about their personal encounter. It wasn't even just about Vanderbrook Grand. It was about the larger system of inequality that extended far beyond the walls of her company. It was about all the people who had been made invisible by society, who had been denied opportunities simply because of where they came from or what they looked like. "I know," Jacqueline said, her voice quiet, "and I'm willing to do more. I can't change everything overnight, but I'm committed to making this right. I've already started the scholarship fund, and we're moving forward with the concert series. But I know it's not just about giving money or creating programs. It's about how we treat people every single day. I want to do more than talk about equality. I want to live it. Elijah's gaze softened slightly, but his skepticism remained. Words are easy. Action is what counts. I know, Jacqueline replied, and I'm prepared to follow through. I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I want you to see that this isn't just a gesture. It's a commitment. For a long moment, Elijah didn't say anything. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Jacqueline felt a flutter of uncertainty. Had she done enough? Was it too late for her to prove herself? I don't know if I believe in this yet, Elijah said finally, but I'll give you credit for trying. And maybe that's a start. Jacqueline's heart lifted slightly at his words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall he had built around himself. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't going to give up on the promise she had made, not just to him, but to herself and to everyone she had wronged. I don't expect forgiveness, she said quietly. I just want to be part of the change, and I want you to know that this is real. I'm not turning back. Elijah looked at her for another moment, then nodded slowly. I'll hold you to that. Jacqueline smiled softly, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a step in the right direction. She didn't need Elijah's forgiveness to know she was on the right path. She didn't need anyone's approval. What mattered now was action. As they sat in the quiet cafe, Jacqueline realized that this was the beginning of something much bigger than just a corporate overhaul or a public apology. This was the beginning of her real journey, a journey of true change, both in the world around her and within herself. The months that followed the conversation in the cafe were filled with a whirlwind of changes, challenges, and growth. Jacqueline's commitment to her new path was tested in ways she hadn't expected, but she pressed on, unwavering in her determination to live up to the promises she had made, not just to Elijah, but to everyone who had been forgotten. The first real sign of change came when the first class of students was awarded the Reed Family Scholarship. Jacqueline stood before a crowd of hopeful, ambitious young people, each one with a story of overcoming adversity. They were the ones who had spent years working hard, only to be told that they weren't good enough, that their background would always be a barrier. But now they were getting a chance to prove that they were just as capable, just as deserving of opportunity as anyone else. It was an emotional moment for Jacqueline. As she handed out the scholarships, she couldn't help but think of her own journey, the path she had taken, the privileges she had enjoyed, and the many times she had turned a blind eye to the struggles of those around her. But now, she was seeing the faces of the young people whose futures were about to be changed by something as simple as an opportunity. Later that night, she walked through the grand hall of Vanderbrook Grand, the hotel where her journey had begun. The space that had once felt like a fortress, a world she had built for herself, now felt different. The changes she had made had begun to ripple through the company, but they had also affected her personally. The more she embraced her new role, the more she realized how much she had to learn, how much she had to change. But it wasn't just the scholarship fund or the concert series that marked the change. It was the daily interactions, the conversations with employees who once felt invisible, the moments when Jacqueline would pause and ask them about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. It was in those small moments that the true transformation was taking place. And as she walked through the hotel, she saw the difference in the eyes of those she passed. The staff no longer looked past her as they had before. They looked at her, no longer with fear or hesitation, but with a quiet recognition. It was a long way from the world she had once known, but Jacqueline felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she was no longer chasing approval. She was no longer seeking to be admired or adored. She was simply trying to do what was right. But even as the changes took hold within Vanderbrook Grand, Jacqueline knew that the real work was just beginning. The Keys to Dignity, her initiative to bring free music performances to underserved communities, was still in its early stages, and there was much work to be done to ensure its success. She had received overwhelming support from local organizations, but the logistics of arranging the concerts, the negotiations with musicians, and the securing of venues had proved to be more challenging than she anticipated. Elijah, too, had become a part of this journey. He had agreed to serve as an advisor for the scholarship fund, offering his perspective on how to make it truly impactful. He had also agreed to mentor some of the scholarship recipients, sharing his experience and guidance to help them navigate the challenges they would face. But despite all that had transpired, Jacqueline still felt a distance between them. Elijah had been gracious, but he wasn't ready to forgive her. He wasn't sure he ever would be, and she didn't expect him to. One evening, as the concert series was preparing to launch, Jacqueline found herself alone in her office, staring out at the city. The weight of everything, her transformation, the promises, the challenges ahead, felt heavier than ever. But this time she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt a quiet certainty that she was on the right path. There was a knock at the door. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. "Come in, Elijah," she said, her voice calm. Elijah stepped inside, a slight hesitation in his step. He had been by her side for months now, helping her navigate the complexities of the changes she was trying to make, but there had always been a quiet distance between them. A part of him had been waiting for Jacqueline to slip, to fall back into her old habits, but it hadn't happened. Still, he wasn't ready to let her off the hook. Not yet. "You wanted to see me?" Elijah asked, his tone polite but still guarded. Jacqueline nodded. "Yes, I wanted to thank you. I don't think I've said that enough. You've been a huge part of this change, and I don't want to overlook that." Elijah tilted his head slightly. "I didn't do anything for you. I did it for the people who have been overlooked for far too long." Jacqueline smiled, her eyes softening. "I know, but still, you've helped me see things in a way I never could have before. I know I have a long way to go, but I'm committed to this." Elijah studied her for a moment. "You don't need to prove anything to me, but what you're doing now, it's making a difference. That's all I care about." There was a pause, and for a moment, the air between them felt more charged than it had before. Jacqueline looked at him, her voice softer now. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Elijah, and I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm doing this for the right reasons. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because I know what it feels like to be ignored, and I don't want to be that person anymore." Elijah nodded slowly. "We all make mistakes. The real question is whether we learn from them." Jacqueline exhaled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. She didn't expect Elijah to embrace her apology, but hearing him speak so honestly gave her the reassurance she needed. "I'm learning," she said softly, "and I will keep learning." For the first time, Elijah smiled, just a small, knowing smile. "Good. Keep doing it. You're on the right track." As he left her office, Jacqueline felt a sense of finality in that moment. It wasn't about perfection, and it wasn't about erasing her past mistakes. It was about choosing to do the right thing, every day, even when it was hard. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but when Jacqueline finally left her office, the city was calm beneath her, and the night felt like the perfect backdrop for the new chapter she was writing. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be setbacks along the way. But she had a purpose now, and it was more than enough to guide her forward. In the end, the transformation wasn't just about Vanderbrook Grand or the scholarship fund, it was about Jacqueline herself. She had gone from a woman who controlled the narrative to one who was finally ready to listen, learn, and change. And in the quiet of that night, she knew she had taken the first real step toward becoming the person she had always wanted to be.